Hey guys, this is Miss Harlequin, and in this video, we are going to be working on ending our screenplays using a really engaging or compelling technique. Right, so previously we've been revising our drafts, and we most recently used the rubric as a guide to look over what might possibly be missing from our drafts. Today, we're going to focus on our conclusions and make sure that they are compelling and meaningful. So first, we got to think about, in general, no matter what the writing assignment is, what's the overall purpose of a story's conclusion? What are they supposed to do? Right, so conclusions should wrap up the ideas in a story, unless you're using the cliffhanger technique, which usually is effective when it's a series of stories and you're going to be continuing it. But even stories that are just standalones will sometimes have a cliffhanger, right, to give the reader a way for them to end it the way they want to and give them something to think about. Conclusions should also leave the reader feeling like most of the story has closure. So for the most part, again, unless there's a cliffhanger, most of the time, people don't want to be left hanging over most of the details in the story. Even if there's a cliffhanger, a lot of stuff should be wrapped up. The cliffhanger should focus on one thing. And that's also the reason why some people don't like cliffhangers, right? They don't like to be left hanging. They want things to be wrapped up. They want to have closure. It should also make the reader think about the story after it's over, right? So if you finish reading a story and then you never think of it again, you don't remember it, was it a really good story? I mean, some people would argue no. It should also help the reader reflect on the story's theme. You know, we know that when we talk about the development of a story's plot, it's usually towards the end where characters have changed, where they've learned lessons, and that's also the time where just overall themes tend to be cemented or finalized. All right, so as a reader, when I look over the conclusion of any story, whether it's another author's story or my own story, I can evaluate and figure out my own opinion on whether it's effective by asking myself three main questions. Do I feel engaged? Do I feel reflective? And do I feel satisfied? If I answer no to any one of those questions, then in my opinion, it might not be the best ending. There might be something that the author could have done further so that I'm able to answer yes for all of these questions. All right, so in general, there are some really popular strategies that authors will use to end their stories. And of course, we can use them, even though this is a screenplay. And, screenplays are still narratives, so they can use these techniques. You can do a circular ending, where the story circles back to the beginning. So sometimes an author will end with the same idea or similar or exact words as the beginning of the story. In 8th grade, we're going to read my favorite book of all time, The Outsiders, and we're going to see that that is the type of ending that the author uses for that book. Could be a surprise ending where the story takes you where you didn't expect it to go. That's sometimes thought of as a twist ending because it takes an exciting turn. Those are usually the kinds of endings that people talk about and they remember for a long time. You could have the basic lesson or moral ending where the main character in the story grows, changes, or learns something at the end of the story. So this is something we see in Walter Dean Meyer's stories a lot. I know that in Monkey Man, one of Walter Dean Meyer's short stories, this is the type of ending he employs. You could have a warm, fuzzy, capturing emotion kind of ending where the story ends with a good feeling inside you, tugging at your heartstrings, making you feel joy and just oh my God, this is good. Makes you feel good about life when you read that kind of an ending. There could be a reflection ending where the narrator of the story jumps back and reflects on what just happened. So he's almost speaking and wrapping things up himself. This is a good technique when you have first person narration. They look back at their experience and they think about what was important, what they have learned. You could also argue that this is kind of Monkey Man's ending for Walter Dean Myers. I can see where it's a reflection ending too. Okay, cliffhanger we talked about, right? Where you leave the reader wanting more. This is to tease or excite your readers so that they'll read the next book in a series. Since this is not what we're doing for our monster screenplays, I would not use this technique. Again, because there is no follow-up. So the cliffhanger is just going to leave readers completely unsatisfied because there is no next story. The question ending. The story ends with a question to keep the reader thinking. So the question usually involves the reader, and writers use a strategy to make their writing memorable. I mean, this is the type of thing we use with essays. I can't think of a book or story that I've seen use this technique, but I guess I could imagine using this myself as a writer. It would be hard though. This could be a difficult technique to use. Funny thought or humorous ending. I don't know that this would be appropriate for a monster screenplays. We know Monster itself was a very like depressing kind of down book, and the screenplays I don't think are really going to be that upbeat either, right? Steve and Mr. Harmon talking about his time in jail. But I mean, maybe you take it into a point where it ends up funny. I don't know. I wouldn't really recommend it. Story ends with a funny thought or something that makes the reader laugh. This helps make the ending more memorable to the reader. Again, I wouldn't choose this one. I wouldn't choose this one. Image ending. The story ends with an important scene that the writer shows the reader through vivid details. By showing and not telling, the writer touches the reader's emotions and conveys a mood. This would be very easy to use for the screenplay, especially since you should end with stage directions, and stage directions can create really descriptive images if you're using a lot of adjectives and adverbs and really describing what the character is doing, where they're walking, the expression on their face. Dialogue ending. All right, even though it's a screenplay, I would not recommend ending with dialogue. We're all going to end with stage directions. So we're going to skip over this one. This would be for other types of stories. All right, so let's look at some samples from some previous students when they wrote their monster screenplays. We're going to practice evaluating. Is this an effective conclusion? And once again, as the reader, to figure that out, we're going to think about the 3 questions. Do you feel engaged? Do you feel reflective? Do you feel satisfied? Steve. Hey, Dad, it was nice seeing you again, and I hope you come back to us soon. Mom is still worried about you, and it's all depressed. Mr. Harmon. You know what? I'm coming back home. I am done being alone. Fade out, medium shot. Steve and his dad are hugging and are about to walk home together. Okay. Do I feel engaged? No. Do I feel reflective? No. I can see an attempt where he says I'm done being alone is starting to kind of feel reflective, but it's not fully explored. And do I feel satisfied? Well, I mean, the father's coming home. I guess I'm kind of satisfied, but there's really no wrap up. I feel like, I feel like I need more. I don't know, something. Some feelings. This would have been a really good one for the emotional ending, right? If he had stretched out the dialogue or really in the stage directions, had Steve and the father like walking home, the sun setting, the birds chirping, just something to make me feel emotional and happy for them. All right. So here's another one. These are going to be a little bit better. Long shot of Mr. Harmon as he gives direct eye contact with Steve. Okay, I always knew you had doubts. I understand that you would question my character. I wouldn't have ever dreamed of me like this a year ago. I don't know who I am. I don't know. I want to tell myself that I'm the good kid that attends Stuyvesant High School, but in reality, I'm not. I make movies of myself, walk up to the camera in different angles, and do everything I can. I still look for an image of myself, but I can't find it. I understand what you're saying. I will try harder to restore the relationship between us, and soon you will find your true identity. It all takes time. Well, this was a good way of talking things out with you, Steve. Know that I love you no matter what. Long shot of Steve and Mr. Harmon hugging each other, and this time the distance between them doesn't grow bigger. Oh, this is so great. Cut to extreme long shot of Steve and Mr. Harmon walking out of Cafe Sunset. The camera follows them, fade out. Oh, there's more. December 25th. It is Christmas Day with our family. Jerry and my parents hold a merry face, but I don't see how they actually feel on the inside. Everything in our family seems to be holding together like drip paper, holding together by tape. Even if we are like this, time will heal. Time will heal and our family will be united once again. I think I know who I am. Not the monster I said I was. I look in the mirror and I see Steve Harmon. This past year has been a mountain, but I overcame it. I've been the happiest I could ever be this past year. All right, so how effective is this ending? Once again, am I engaged? Do I feel reflective? And do I feel satisfied? And what kind of techniques has the student used to really end it? So you can see they've done something really spectacular here by including the journal entry technique from the original book, which was not something that was mentioned in the task, but the student clearly looked at the book, saw the way that it was written, knew that this assignment was supposed to be building on that novel, and decided to mimic that technique. And you can also see that here we have emotions in the ending and we have reflection, right? So like they're not quite there yet, but they are slowly putting their family back together, which is very satisfying. That's what you want for Steve. You don't want Steve, a character we've grown to like over the course of the book, to have his family destroyed by this and for his life to be ruined. We want them to slowly heal and get back together. So very, very effective. Of course, all this caps is wrong. I just can't let that go. Of course, this should not be in all caps. The name should be in all caps, the film techniques, but all of this should have been lowercase. All right, sample number 2. Number 2. Steve in a cold voice. I wouldn't want to outstay my welcome. Maybe you can think about what you really mean to say to me, because right now, I don't feel like you really think that I'm benign. I should just go. Enjoy the food. The threat will leave you alone now. I hope you're happy. Fade out, long shot of Mr. Harmon and Steve. Mr. Harmon says something that isn't audible. We see Steve stuff 3 prawns into his mouth and walk off camera view while chewing. Mr. Harmon buries his face in his hands and shakes his head as the screen goes black. All right, so once again, do we feel engaged? Do we feel reflective? Do we feel satisfied with this ending? Well, when I look back at the techniques being used, I can see that this is definitely, in a way, kind of a cliffhanger ending, because you want to know if, like, Steve and the father will ever get back. At the end of the screenplay, like, they're not, right? Steve is still pissed at him, and he is leaving. Mr. Harmon's sad about that. So there's definitely emotion in this ending, but not the warm, fuzzy kind. It's an emotional ending in, like, a sad kind of way. So yeah, I would say that I do feel engaged. I do feel reflective. The only thing that I don't feel satisfied about is just that I want Steve and Mr. Harmon to make up. So that just personally leaves me a little unsatisfied, but this is still a very decent ending. All right, so one more sample. Sample number 3. Mr. Harmon, Steve angrily. What makes you feel like you have the right to say that to me? Especially if all you wanted was to make me into a mini you. Just leave me alone. I don't need to stand here and listen to what you wanted me to be, when I have all the time to go and find out who I really am, not a monster like you thought I was. Cut to a long shot of Steve and Mr. Harmon. Camera focuses on Steve, who's walking away from the scene, brushing past the crowd of diner customers who had come to watch the argument. Steve suddenly stops and angrily whispers incoherent words to Mrs. Harmon, who nods her head in understanding as she follows Steve. Cut to Mr. Harmon, who looks at Steve's and Mrs. Harmon's retreating figures in astonishment. The camera follows Steve and Mrs. Harmon out of the diner. Close-up of Steve with tears in his eyes as he wipes them away. Cut to, long shot of diner. Camera then focuses on the sky, then fades out. All right, so for our final conclusion, once again, do you feel engaged? Do you feel reflective? Do you feel satisfied? All right, you can definitely tell that this is an image ending. There's so much description of the characters and their behavior. It's really painting a really solid picture for us of what the characters are thinking and feeling as the movie is ending, and you definitely feel the emotion and the pain, so it's an emotional ending too. I would definitely say I feel satisfied. Once again, I want them to be able to work this out, but I don't feel like I've been left hanging. This is the way that the characters are, this is what happened to them, and it's sad, but I definitely was engaged. Really great descriptive language here. All right, so for the work time, I want you to look over your conclusion. How can you revise it to add stage directions or even a journal entry that will use one of the compelling conclusion strategies to end your screenplay? If you want to look over the slides from this lesson, they are in the Google Drive Student Resource folder. Also, the sample conclusions are there, and I'll put a couple of more up there so you can see a greater variety. When you're done, you should peer revise your drafts with a partner. Remember, your goal for every writing assignment should always be to revise with at least 3 different classmates. Because like I've said before, the more people who are able to look at your writing and give you feedback, the stronger your overall writing could end up being. One person could be really good at looking at conclusions, for example, and then somebody else might be really good at grammar. So you want to try to get as many different opinions as possible. 3 is usually a good number.